There comes a point in almost every relationship when a man becomes quiet. He may text less, call less, become harder to read, or suddenly seem like he is pulled back emotionally. And if you care about him, your first reaction might be panic. You start wondering, did I do something wrong? Is he losing interest? Is there another woman? Should I text him again? When a man becomes quiet, your first instinct may be to wonder what went wrong. You look at your phone, reread old messages, analyze his last conversation, and start creating stories in your mind. You may think, is he losing interest? Did I say something wrong? Is he talking to somebody else? But before you react emotionally, you have to understand something important. Uncertainty reveals how much control you have over your own emotions. Anybody can feel confident when everything is going their way. The real test comes when you don't have all the answers. When someone you care about becomes distant, can you remain grounded? Can you continue your day without allowing their behavior to determine your mood? Can you resist the urge to chase reassurance every few minutes? That is where your strength begins. You don't need to pretend you don't care. You don't need to become cold or play childish games. You simply need to remind yourself that another person's temporary silence does not define your value. His behavior belongs to him. Your response belongs to you. If he doesn't text, you don't have to send 5 messages. If he needs space, you don't have to beg him to stay. If you're unsure about what he's thinking, you don't have to destroy your peace trying to figure it out. Give people room to reveal themselves, because when you stop chasing every unanswered question, you start seeing behavior more clearly. You notice whether he eventually communicates, whether he makes an effort, and whether his actions match his words. You stop reacting to every little change and start looking at the bigger picture. A confident woman understands that love should add to her life, not consume it. She can care deeply without losing herself. She can miss someone without begging for attention. She can desire connection while still maintaining her standards. The moment you learn to stay calm during uncertainty, you become much harder to manipulate, much harder to confuse, and much more capable of recognizing whether someone truly belongs in your life. Sometimes a man's silence reveals how much you are willing to tolerate just to keep his attention. And this is where you have to be very careful, because caring about someone is not the same thing as abandoning yourself for them. You can love a man deeply and still refuse to chase him when he pulls away. When you constantly reach out every time he becomes distant, you may unintentionally create an unhealthy pattern. He withdraws, you pursue. He gives less, you give more. He becomes unavailable, and suddenly you're working twice as hard to keep the relationship alive. Over time, you may find yourself accepting behavior that you would never have accepted when you first met him. That's why your self-respect matters. A woman who knows her worth doesn't need to prove that she's worthy of someone's attention. She doesn't have to compete for basic communication. She doesn't have to send endless messages just to get a response. And she certainly doesn't have to convince someone to appreciate what she brings into their life. If a man pulls back, give him the opportunity to show you what he actually wants. Don't rush to fill every silence. Don't immediately assume you have to fix everything. Sometimes the best thing you can do is step back and observe. Watch what happens when you stop doing all the emotional work. Does he come toward you? Does he check on you? Does he make an effort? Does he notice your absence? Does he communicate honestly? These actions can tell you much more than trying to force an explanation out of him. But remember, self-respect doesn't mean playing games. You shouldn't disappear just to make him jealous. You shouldn't ignore him to punish him. You shouldn't pretend you don't care when you actually do. That's not confidence. That's manipulation. Real confidence is being honest with yourself. You can say, I care about this person, but I will not chase someone who repeatedly makes me feel unwanted. That's strength. Because the right relationship will never require you to constantly sacrifice your dignity just to keep somebody interested. You should be able to love someone without losing yourself in the process. And when you protect your standards, you give people the chance to either rise to them or reveal that they were never prepared to meet them. Not every time a man becomes quiet means he is playing a game with you. Sometimes silence simply means he is processing something, dealing with stress, handling responsibilities, or trying to understand what he is feeling. And this is where emotional maturity becomes important, because if you assume every quiet moment is a test, you may create problems that were never there in the first place. A healthy relationship requires two people who understand that everyone needs space sometimes. The important question isn't whether he ever becomes quiet. The important question is what happens after the silence. A mature man can take a little time for himself and still come back to communicate. He can say, I needed some time to think. He can explain what was bothering him. He can acknowledge that his distance may have affected you. He doesn't leave you permanently confused and expect you to figure everything out alone. That's the difference between healthy space and emotional punishment. When someone uses silence to punish you, control you, make you anxious, or force you to chase them, that's a completely different situation. You may find yourself constantly wondering what you did wrong, watching your phone, replaying conversations, and trying to change yourself just to get their attention back. Don't confuse that with love. Love should create a sense of emotional safety, even when difficult conversations happen. Two people can disagree, need space, or become frustrated without turning communication into a weapon. So when he becomes quiet, don't immediately panic and don't immediately attack him either. Take a breath, give reasonable space. Then pay attention to what he does next. Does he come back and communicate? Does he explain himself? Does he care about how you experience the situation? Does he make an effort to repair the connection? Those answers matter because anyone can say, I care about you. What matters is how they behave when things become uncomfortable. And you need to understand something else. You are not responsible for dragging communication out of another adult. You can open the door to an honest conversation, but you cannot force someone to walk through it. If he needs space, allow him to have it. If he needs time, give him reasonable time. But if silence becomes a repeated pattern of confusion and emotional punishment, believe the pattern. Don't spend your life trying to decode someone who refuses to communicate clearly. A relationship becomes stronger when both people can speak honestly, listen respectfully, and return to each other after difficult moments. You don't need to fear every period of silence. Sometimes silence is simply space. But when someone consistently uses silence to make you feel powerless, the lesson isn't to chase harder. The lesson is to recognize what healthy communication should look like and decide whether the relationship is giving you that. One of the hardest things to learn in relationships is that you cannot force someone to give you clarity. When a man becomes distant and stops communicating the way he used to, your mind may immediately start searching for answers. You want to know what happened, why he changed, what he is thinking, and whether you should do something to fix the situation. But sometimes, the more you chase an answer, the more power you give the person who refuses to communicate. You have to learn how to step back without becoming bitter. If you have already asked a reasonable question, expressed how you feel, and given him an opportunity to communicate, you don't need to keep repeating yourself. You don't need to send another message because he hasn't answered the first one. You don't need to write a long paragraph explaining why you deserve better. You don't need to convince someone to recognize your value. Let them respond when they are ready. And if they don't respond, let their lack of response give you information. This doesn't mean you should assume the worst. It doesn't mean every unanswered message is proof that someone doesn't care. Life happens. People get busy. People experience difficult moments. But when silence becomes a repeated pattern, you have to stop focusing on individual moments and start looking at the overall behavior. Consistency tells the truth. If someone repeatedly disappears whenever things become serious, refuses to discuss problems, and leaves you constantly questioning where you stand, then you shouldn't spend all your energy trying to decode their behavior. Their behavior is already communicating something. You deserve communication that doesn't require detective work. You deserve someone who can say, "I'm overwhelmed right now, but I care about you, and I'll talk to you when I can." That's completely different from someone who disappears and leaves you emotionally stranded. And here's where your power comes back. You don't have to chase someone into choosing you. Let people make their decisions. Let them show you their priorities. Let them demonstrate their intentions through consistent action. Because when you stop chasing answers, you create space for the truth to reveal itself. Maybe he comes back and explains everything. Maybe he realizes he handled the situation poorly and makes an effort to repair the connection. Or maybe he continues walking away. Either way, you gain clarity. Your job isn't to force the outcome. Your job is to pay attention to what the situation is teaching you. Sometimes the answer you're desperately waiting to hear isn't hidden in another message. Sometimes it's already visible in someone's behavior. And when you become strong enough to accept what someone's actions are showing you, you stop begging for clarity and start choosing peace. When someone becomes distant, the easiest thing to do is make that person the center of your world. You check your phone constantly. You wonder when they're going to call. You replay the last conversation. You look at their social media. You start imagining every possible reason for their silence. Before you realize it, an entire day has passed and you've spent most of it thinking about someone who isn't even communicating with you. That's not where your power is. Your power is in remembering that your life does not stop because someone else becomes uncertain. Keep going. Get up in the morning and handle your responsibilities. Work on your goals. Take care of yourself. Spend time with people who genuinely love and support you. Learn something new. Exercise. Pray. Build your confidence. Do the things that remind you that you are a whole person with a life outside of a relationship. And don't do these things just to make him notice you. Do them because your life matters. There's a huge difference between focusing on yourself because you want someone to chase you and focusing on yourself because you refuse to abandon your own life while waiting for someone else's attention. The first is a strategy. The second is self-respect. You don't need to post pictures hoping he'll see them. You don't need to make him jealous. You don't need to pretend you're happier than you are. You don't need to manufacture a reaction. Just become genuinely busy building a life you are proud of. When you do that, something changes inside you. His silence may still disappoint you, but it no longer controls you. You may miss him, but you don't lose yourself. You may care about what happens between you, but you understand that your emotional stability cannot depend entirely on whether he sends a message today. That's maturity. And when you stop making another person responsible for your happiness, you become much clearer about what you actually want from the relationship. You begin asking better questions. Not, how can I make him come back? But, is this relationship healthy for me? Not, what can I do to make him choose me? But is he showing me that he is capable of choosing me consistently? Not, how do I get his attention? But, why am I accepting so little attention in the first place? Those questions can change everything. Because you were not created to sit around waiting for someone to decide whether you're worth their effort. You have dreams to pursue, goals to accomplish, people to love, and a life to live. If he comes back with honesty, consistency, and genuine effort, you can decide whether you want to meet him there. But if he doesn't, your life still continues, and that's the mindset you need. Care deeply, but never abandon yourself. Love someone, but don't lose your identity. Give people space, but don't give them unlimited access to your peace. When your life remains full, even when someone becomes distant, you stop fearing their silence and start trusting yourself. Sometimes the hardest truth in a relationship is realizing that silence can become an answer. Not because every quiet moment means someone has stopped caring, but because repeated behavior eventually tells you more than words ever could. You can spend weeks analyzing messages, remembering good moments, and hoping things will return to the way they used to be. But at some point, you have to stop listening only to what someone says and start paying attention to what they consistently do. If a man says he cares but repeatedly disappears, leaves you confused, avoids important conversations, and gives you attention only when it is convenient for him, you have to ask yourself whether his actions match his words, because love isn't just what somebody feels. Love is also how somebody behaves. You shouldn't have to become a detective to understand where you stand with someone. You shouldn't have to decode every message or spend every night wondering whether you're still important to them. A healthy connection can have difficult moments, misunderstandings, and periods of space, but there should still be an underlying willingness to communicate and repair what has been damaged. That's why you shouldn't be afraid to observe. Don't rush to change yourself because somebody became distant. Don't assume that you weren't attractive enough, loving enough, patient enough, or interesting enough. Sometimes someone's inability to communicate has more to do with their emotional maturity than with your worth. Let their behavior speak. If they return and communicate honestly, listen. If they apologize and change their behavior, observe whether the change lasts. If they make consistent effort, decide whether that effort aligns with what you need. But if they continue giving you confusion, distance, and inconsistency, don't keep convincing yourself that the next day will magically be different. You cannot build a peaceful relationship with someone who repeatedly creates emotional chaos. And this is where you have to become honest with yourself. Sometimes you aren't waiting for someone to come back. You're waiting for the version of them you hope they would become. You're holding on to potential instead of reality. You're remembering the beautiful conversations while ignoring the repeated disappointment. You're focusing on the moments when they made you feel loved, while overlooking the moments when they made you feel invisible. Don't let a few good memories convince you to tolerate a pattern that keeps hurting you. You don't need to hate someone to walk away from inconsistency. You don't need revenge. You don't need to prove a point. You simply need enough self-respect to say, this relationship is not giving me the communication, consistency, and peace I deserve. That is not giving up on love. That is choosing healthy love. So if a man becomes silent, don't immediately panic. Don't chase him endlessly. Don't play games. Don't punish him. Pause. Observe, give reasonable space. Then look at the pattern, because the real lesson isn't about figuring out how to make a man miss you or how to make him chase you. The real lesson is learning how to recognize when someone's presence adds peace to your life and when their absence is revealing something you needed to see. Sometimes silence doesn't mean the relationship is over. But sometimes, after you've given someone every reasonable opportunity to communicate, their continued silence tells you exactly where you stand. And when you finally accept that truth, you stop waiting for someone else to give you permission to move forward and start giving yourself permission to choose peace.